Okay, this is a follow-up video on my changing the shock oil in my shock on my Royal Star Venture. I didn't point out that you don't need to remove the back wheel to get the shock out. At least all I had to do was remove this painted metal cover on each side of the bike, remove the seat by removing the two nuts at the bottom of the studs that go through those holes on the seat, remove the saddlebags so you can get your hand in there to the hardware on the shock. You can see the bolt right there, the air hose. Okay, the air hose comes up here, has a 19mm nut on it. Don't lose that nut. I misplaced it and tried to buy one at the hardware store, and I went through my collection of metric nuts and bolts that I have had since the 70s. I could not find anything even close to that. So don't lose that. It turned out that that was stuck in the socket that I used to take it off, but don't lose that. And when you take the saddlebags off, it's simple. I literally could do it holding my breath one time and get all the 4 bolts. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. This one here, closest to the tail light, has a spacer on the outside of the saddlebag, between the saddlebag and this bracket. So when you pull the bolt out, that's going to drop, so make sure you keep track of it. But you don't need to remove the rear wheel. You need to jack the bike up. And I have a couple videos on YouTube showing how wonderful that lift is. When I bought mine, it was $50 on eBay about 3 or 4 years ago. That was to lift my Goldwing. I discovered them by watching videos of a very professional company that makes very professional videos in a studio lifting Goldwings. It's called Traction Dynamics, Traxxion Dynamics. And they had these holding up GL 1800 Goldwings, which weigh much more than the Ventures do. So I thought that's good enough for me, and I searched and found them for sale on eBay for $50. And you can find them if you type in the search on eBay, motorcycle scissor lift jack, with different variations of the wording in the search, and you'll find them. There's usually a couple dozen of them for sale on there at any one time. I got the one that has the saddles. Sometimes they don't have the saddles. But I made this board that fits. It's a little over 14 inches long. Okay, it's like 14.25 inches long. And I put these 2 slots with a circular saw. One is at 4 inches. And the second one is at approximately 8 1/4 to 8.5. I just did several cuts with a circular saw halfway through to allow those 2 slots to fit, whoops, over those tabs right there. Those 2 tabs, I suppose they were to bolt the center stand to at one time. And this board just fits right in there perfectly. And anyway, it fits in there and it lays flat on this jack. Okay. Now the reason you have to jack the bike up is because you need to lift the bike so you can get the 2 bolts out of the shock without having the weight of the bike on them. You need to remove that one at the bottom of the shock. And with the saddlebags and the side covers and the seat removed, you can get access to the top bolt. And when you have the bike on the jack, you just have to lower the bike until the weight of the wheel comes off of the bolts. Then the bolts literally just slide out once you have the nuts off the end. The nuts are 17 millimeter on both ends of those 2 bolts. Then, because you have the air hose disconnected and this rubber vent hose that goes to that bellows looking rubber cover around the shock just slides right down. And I drained out into a measuring cup the oil in the shock, and I measured how much I got out. Now, last year I got out 125 cc's. And when I drained that oil that I put in last year, when I measured it, I got out approximately 125 cc's again. So I didn't lose any oil, even though my shock appeared to be weeping a little bit of oil from the seal, but there was no puddle. This is where I parked the bike over the winter. Right here, there's no oil on the ground. So that's acceptable to me, that amount of seepage. And I'm just going to change the oil every year in the shock, because it did appear to be oxidized, or filled with contamination, or maybe it was overheated. Shock absorbers and fork, they get hot. I remember grabbing onto a shock one time to help my race bike into my van back when I road raced motorcycles, and that burned my hand. That's how hot that shock got. So that oil gets pretty hot and it gets cooked. And I have known guys that endurance race sport bikes, and their suspension specialists, they change the oil every race. So the oil that was in my shock up till last year was in there, 13 years, 14 years? So, you don't have to remove the rear wheel. You do have to remove the bags, the side cover, and the seat. Jack the bike up so you can take the weight off of the bolts, take off the nut holding the air hose in, and remove this breather from its little holster there beside the battery, and the shock will just lower right out of the frame. Then you drain the oil and replace it with, I used 7-weight fork oil last year, and the bike felt different. It might have been a placebo effect, but the bike just felt different. Of course, I did a lot of other maintenance while I had I did take the rear wheel off and the swing arm off last year, because whenever I buy a motorcycle, I always assume everything's been neglected. So, but anyway, it's not necessary to remove the rear wheel. Somebody asked me that this morning, and I thought I would do this follow-up video on that. So, I'll see you there.